And I am here today with one of the most important authors in Star Wars at the moment, I would say, as well as he's got his hands in 100 other things, all of which that I've consumed are amazing. So I welcome Cavan Scott. Cavan, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well. It's been a long day of meetings today, and so if I'm a little bit frazzled, that's why. But you probably means you'll get a good interview out of me because I've got no filter now. So I'll probably just say anything, which means that Disney lawyers are probably now circling as we speak.
Well, unfortunately, I already had all my questions approved by Disney Lucasfilm, so I'm not allowed to just throw one out. And I'm sure if I said to you, "Hey, Cavan, what are you and the other High Republic authors talking about the summit you did?" Just ruined the whole of Phase 3 for me. Let's just do that years before it's even 6 months before Phase 2 even comes out. So you would get into a lot of trouble, and I know not to ask those sort of questions, so I won't put you in that position. Before we get into Star Wars and those sort of things, I want to ask you sort of, what is it, a day in the life of Cavan Scott in essence? Like, obviously you're a writer and you write, audio dramas as well as books and comics. And I know there's a few screenplays going on in the background as well. So like, what is of your, like, do you work every day, including the weekends? Just run us through as far as you can say what your kind of process is from getting up and doing work in essence.
I try only to work the weekdays. And there was a point where I was working every hour God sent and a few he didn't. And, that way burnout lay. So, and I think around the time, the beginning, I've talked about this publicly, around the time, the beginning of the High Republic, there was so much going on that I did pretty much burn out. But so now I know the signs of when that's coming. And so, I try and keep the weekends free. It doesn't always work. I ended up working on things this weekend. And I try to, at least by 9 o'clock in the evening, to stop work. The difficulty is that most of the people I work with are in the States. Very few people I work with in the UK, even though that's where I'm based. So a lot of the time when I'm finishing work for the day, everyone's waking up and going, "Hey, Cav, talk." But I sort of try to say that at least by 9 o'clock, I've stopped. It's the constant thing of working from home, everything blurs into each other. But so largely that's what I try to do. A lot of the time outside of that, I'm reading material connected to whatever I'm working on as well, or watching material as well. But I am one of those people that try to sit at my desk by 9:30 and work through till 6 and breaking for lunch and all those things that you're supposed to do. But it is my job. And so I try to be sitting here in this chair. That's why it's a very comfortable chair, and get the work done. And so I'm very strict at setting myself deadlines. Within my deadlines, I'm very strict to saying, I have to hit so many words today, so many pages today. And I used to be a magazine editor, so I naturally schedule things. My wife was our production manager on the magazines I was working for. So, between the two of us, we have that sort of production background. And so my calendar is, like when they say on air traffic control that they're pushing tin, they're moving planes around. That's what my calendar feels like. So I know pretty much what I've got to do on every day, and I try and leave some space, so if things happen I can then move it around. And so the beginning of every day is pretty much doing that, and then try not to look at email till the afternoon, because most of the email I get is in the afternoon anyway, and that's email's always what derails you and stops you doing what you should actually be doing that day. So I try and go for a walk every morning, drink copious amounts of coffee, which I probably shouldn't drink as much as I do, and then sit down and just get into the writing, whatever I've got to write that day, to get into that writing.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued to hear other people's sort of how they do their work and things, because I spoke to Paolo Villanelli a short while ago, who's obviously an artist in the Star Wars realm of comics, and he had something similar. He's like, when I started, I was so enthusiastic about the work and I took on a billion things, so I was just like working every waking second, and he was like, you just burn out. So in line with that, sort of, how much can you tell me about, not the specifics, but like how far ahead are you from release? Because I know obviously at the moment, very recently you went to the States and did another summit for the High Republic stuff, but that was Phase 3 because Phase 2 is coming out shortly. So I know you've also got things like The Ward and Shadow Service, and I saw Phantom of the Opera, I think, pop up in your screen, in your newsletter as well, that you're doing a comic adaptation of that. So not with the specifics of, I don't want you spoiling anything that's coming out, but how far ahead are you with your sort of writing to release? I assume it's slightly different per project.
It's absolutely different. So, Phantom was a good example because of delays. I wrote Phantom 4 years ago and it came out end of last year, beginning of this. So that was, but then there was pandemics and things in the middle of that one, and that was a graphic novel that was supposed to be sold in theatres, and then there were no theatres. So yeah, it depends. I mean, so we're currently working on the beginning of Star Wars: The High Republic Phase 2 for Marvel, which comes out in October. And so that gives you an idea. There's another creator-owned comic I'm working on that hasn't been announced yet, which is launching probably around December. And issue 1's written, and we started working on that. So all good products, you try and at least get some time, in between. So you've got room to maneuver. And then there's some books I'm working on, which have a really long gestation period. So yeah, it does depend on the project, but usually it's anything up to sort of like 6 months and beyond from when you finish, when you down tools on it. Comics are different because comics can be right up to the wire depending on what's going on. So sometimes I've written comics and they're out within what seems like a month, and other times I've written something that's not out for 2 years or whatever. So yeah, it really does depend on the project.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think I heard when on one of the other interviews that you did, it might have been speaking about either Ward or Shadow Service. Mm-hmm. One of those things I think you started doing in like 2018, and then once again, it seems like everything you've been involved with recently has been delayed because of this little pandemic that we've had.
Yeah, the Ward. So the Ward was absolutely that. So the Ward. I mean, I've been pitching the Ward for donkey's years, and I went back and looked. I think I first started throwing that idea around sort of 2012, and sometimes that's how long it takes for someone. I think it went through a publisher, and then that publisher said no, and they went to another publisher, and then it's found its home at Dark Horse. And so yeah, I mean, these things do take time, but yeah, the pandemic did change everything. I mean, it changed the High Republic because we had that 6-month period when it was pushed back, but we'd already done a lot of the work, and so actually we ended up just doing more, and there was a little bit of fine-tuning, but we didn't really have the ability to fine-tune a lot of it because it had already gone past that point.
Of course.
And yeah, the pandemic did put a lot of things on hold. One thing that actually was great was Shadow Service, which was the creator I was doing with Vault Comics. We were due to launch that summer, the first summer of the pandemic, and they just went, let's do it, let's keep going. And when we didn't really know if there was going to be comic shops, we didn't know anything. But Vault said, let's just keep going with the plan. I think it was a couple of months delay. But other than that, yeah. I mean, launching a comic in the middle of a pandemic when there's no conventions and shops were struggling, it was hard. But yeah, we did it. And that's coming back this month now, actually, for its next run. So yeah, that has absolutely added time. Usually the more the time you've got, the better, really. So, so you're not rushing, but sometimes things happen and you usually you do the work, then there's a bit of a lull, and then there's a mad panic at the end. That shouldn't be a mad panic because you all know it's coming, but it's like, oh God, because you've also, in your brain, you've gone, I've done that. And then you have to sort of remember how to do press for things because you're like, well, I can't remember what was in that story because I've written 3 more since then. And so you do live in this weird time warp. So the summit you were talking about, we were in Florida. We'd not been together as the 5 of us since the launch in February 2020. And we were discussing the very end of phase 3, which we knew what was happening in the end of phase 3, but we wanted to reflect on what we've done so far, see what's changed, see what's been what's evolved along the way, stress test that end, make sure it still worked, and it did, thank heavens, and work out if there's anything else we want to do to get there. So yeah, I mean, that stuff we're talking years to come, so and it's stories that we won't write until a long time, but it's the beginning of that process. I mean, yeah, High Republic itself was 2018 we started talking about it, and so it's a bit weird now that we've gone past the end of phase 1, because for a long time that's all we wanted to do was get to phase 1, and now we're well on the way to phase 2. And so yeah, you're constantly playing this weird time warp, and then when you do multiple projects, you haven't got a hope of trying to work out when it is. This is why I write everything down, because otherwise my brain would just explode or implode, one of them.
Both at the same time. Do a nice little paradox there. Create a whole new universe. It is one of those funny things. I mean, I'm a massive note taker myself. I've got 4 notebooks around me, and I've just got 2 podcasts. So compared to have to actually, write cohesive fiction, and especially when so many of it is adaptations, and as you say, you know, you're so many cycles ahead. It's like you're doing press for something where you can't say what you're working on at the moment because it will spoil the thing that's just been released. So that must be maddening in a lot of ways. But I want to speak about Shadow Service, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. I will confess. I read it, and it was one of those things where, you know, I love your High Republic work and your other Star Wars work, Tales of Vader's Castle, those sort of things. And so I had hopes that it would be great, but obviously when it's a new IP, it's always one of those things like, how is this going to grab you? And what I think I loved, I've written so many notes about it, but I thought there are so many brilliant ideas within Shadow Service, and it's really fun. And I think that you and also the artist who is Corin, I had the name written down, Corin Howell, just to make sure. But like, I know that you've spoken about prior with sort of the collaborative effort and things, and I just thought you could tell us a little bit from your perspective about Shadow Service and how freeing it must be to do an independent or a creator-owned project, you know, with Vault Comics and things, where although I'm sure, and I know from what you've said before, writing Star Wars is fun, but because you've got so much weight behind it, you've got story group, you've obviously, with the High Republic, it's a collaborative effort. Whereas with Shadow Service, it's kind of the opposite. It's, you and Corin are the collaborators, but you're at the top. So I thought you could tell us a little bit about Shadow Service and what the experience was of being able to write something like that.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things, I'm so glad you said fun, because one of the things we said for Shadow Service, we wanted it to be the equivalent of going to see a Mission Impossible film. You know, it was supposed to be a good time. Now, that doesn't mean there's not going to be, you know, heartache along the way and, you know, and drama and everything you expect. But yeah, we wanted to tap into those things when you go and see a Bond movie, and you go and see a Mission Impossible film, a Bourne movie, where you know you're going in for a good time, and along the way, you want to surprise people within that. But that was absolutely part of the brief we gave ourselves for Shadow Service, and it seems to have worked. And I think that's why it's chimed with people. And it was supposed to be complete and utter escapism at a time where I think we all needed it, which I think is actually why it worked, and why it's continuing to work. But yeah, I think first of all, when I first started working on it, and I've done some creator-owned stuff before, but this was my first sort of major creator-owned book. I suddenly realised that there was no one else I had to check with about doing anything other than Corin. You know, and we had editors, we had Teo and Adrian, and they were there to guide rather than dictate, in a way that perhaps sometimes when you're working in licensed things. I'm not saying that those editors are tyrants, but they sometimes have to make you draw the line because you're working within parameters, and there's no pushing those parameters. One of the interesting things with Shadow Service is realizing that we had to put parameters in, because otherwise it would be like nonsense. It would just go everywhere, and there'll be no cohesive structure. And so I think that's one of the fun things when you're starting one of these projects, is you work out where the guardrails are, where are the boundaries. And then, just like you do on a license project, you try and work out, how can I push against those, you know, and where can I take it, and where will people expect those guardrails to take you, and how can you bust them out? So yeah, it's a very different experience. It's a little bit scarier as well, because the same thing you just said, it's a new IP. So I was asking people to come with me on this journey without the weight of 40 years of Star Wars or 50 years of Doctor Who or whatever else I've been working on for the last few years. So yeah, I had to make sure that we delivered, because there will always be people who don't like something. And I think, and I say repeatedly, that's right and proper, and that's how the world should be. Not everyone can like everything, but you have to hope and try and work it to a way that a great number of people will like it, so you can keep making those stories. And we have thankfully sort of seemed to tapped into something with Shadow Service, and so I said we're coming back this month. But yeah, it is terrifying in a different kind of terror. When you write to something like Star Wars, the terror is, especially for me, and it was the same when I was writing Doctor Who, that both those franchises are so important to me and have been such part of my fandom that I feel the weight of Timothy Thorne novels weighing down on me, because I know what they meant to me, and not just Tim stuff, but all of that vast library of material, whether it's the EU or whether it's the new canon. I feel that weight and that responsibility all the time. And when I was working on Doctor Who, it was exactly the same. Right? All the stories, all the comics, the audios, and whatever. It was because I know how important it was to me. I know how important it is to other people. So you feel that weight. It's obviously a very different feeling when you're launching your own thing, because the weight is that you want it to work so you can carry on telling those stories, and you want people to connect to it, and you're putting yourself out there in a way that's probably a little bit more, makes you look more vulnerable than you are if you're working within something like Star Wars. So it's the emotions is very similar, but they're just you're coming at them from a different angle.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way of putting it. And sort of sticking with Shadow Service as well, I want to ask you some of the ideas that you use in it, which I think are excellent. The main idea that I think is just, I don't know if you took this from somewhere else, but if you haven't, I want to just give you full kudos because this is a genius idea. Magic insomnia. Like that, yeah. Did you create that? Or at least do you think you created that, just in case it's not appeared somewhere else?
As far as I know, I've created that.
Such a good idea.
So, yeah, and it's something, I mean, now when we return to Shadow Service, Gina, the main character, is now very much ingrained in MI666. And so they have ways and means of helping her avoid that situation. So, but it's that classic thing of magic has a cost, and and when you're building you can't just be magic can do anything, because then there's no drama. So you have to have moments where there is a cost for the individual. So there is, without spoilers, there's a sequence in Shadow Service where Gina goes on the run and she's having to use loads of really powerful magic to keep them going, which means she's knackered, and which means her magic isn't working so well. And so it's like a vicious cycle. So the idea of Gina, if she casts a spell, she won't sleep for a week afterwards. And she has, through years of quaffing what we would call potions in other forms of magic, which are like smoothies for her, she keeps in her there's a scene that I had to cut out when you actually had her making, I did far too much research into what would go into a potion for strength or vitality, and so she turns that into a homemade smoothie. But just for space, it didn't happen. If Shadow Service ever goes into a different medium, I think that's something I'll be looking into get back in there. And now, as she's part of MI666, they have drugs and that to help her with this kind of thing. But yeah, it was definitely something I wanted to explore, because you can't have your character just be able to do everything. Every character, whether it's a superhero or a wizard or whatever, needs a restraint, which is why in classic superheroes, Green Lantern can go up against things that are yellow, which is probably the craziest restraint in the world, but it's there. That's why kryptonite exists. That's why Batman does actually have to sleep every now and then. And so you have those boundaries to make the character feel more real, but also to put them in a situation when they're not all powerful. And it's something I think we've been trying to do in Star Wars as well, that it is, well, for a character like Yoda can obviously really control aspects of the Force with seemingly very little effort on his part. But as we've been going into the High Republic, we've really sort of tried to drill into the idea that it's not always easy to levitate with something in the Force. It isn't just a case of going, whoop, there you go. It's like you have to center yourself, and it can have an effect on your body because you are part of the Force, and the Force is part of your physical nature as well. And so we've definitely been exploring with that, and I think that's what we saw at the end of Last Jedi, spoilers, with what happens to Luke. There's a cost for doing something of great magnitude, because if there isn't, you stop relating to that character. If Luke could move a planet with the Force and it didn't have any effect on him whatsoever, you just go, oh, okay, fair enough. And I think sometimes in the excesses of the EU, I think that's what I struggled with, that idea of, and I know it's based on Yoda, being able to lift an X-Wing, when he's tiny himself. But again, Yoda's been practicing for many, 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 many years. And so it's it's making these journeys that all these characters go on seem a little bit more realistic, because let's face it, we all have those moments when we struggle and have to go against anything. So that was my version in Shadow Service of those moments.
It's a very good shout. Yeah, I mean, Legend. I love Star Wars. I've got tattoos and everything, and one of my tattoos is of Starkiller from the Force Unleashed games.
Yeah,
he's, apart from probably Darth Nihilus, he's like one of the most overpowered characters ever.
Oh yeah,
So
and he's
really,
amazing.
He's great. I love him, but
put him in a story with some people who aren't so powered, and it becomes silly because you have to find so many reasons why he's not doing something.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why, spoiler alert for a game that's been out for 15 years, why he basically has to die at the end of each one, because they're just like, we can't have a character this powerful running around. We have to have an insular story. He creates havoc in certain ways. He's got very strong emotional beats, so people do connect with him, and he's trying to find himself, which is a very common theme in Star Wars. But you can't have him just pop up in a lot of people like clamoring for him to come back in canon. I was like, look, he's my favorite character in Legends, but I can't have him in canon.
I'd love to see him back in canon, but what I'd love to see is you deal with that situation. And what the absolute reality of a Jedi or a Dark Jedi or whoever who has that much power, and how every other Jedi would cope around them, and how the enemies of the Jedi, what it would do. And let's face it, again, using superheroes as an analogy, I love the part of the story we now have in sort of modern superhero stories that Gotham is like Gotham because Batman decided to put a cowl on one day, and so the villains stay. It becomes an arms race. And that's what would happen in Star Wars, that people will be trying to weaponize their abilities with the Force to combat him, or to prove, or to keep him under control, because it could all go very wrong very, very quickly. And so, I'd like him. I'd love him to be back in canon, just because there's a lot of drama there. Especially, where you're going to put him in canon, because that's the good thing we can play with now. It's like Thrawn appearing before the original trilogy rather than afterwards, So depending on where you drop Starkiller, that would be really interesting, because, the Jedi of the prequels would deal with him very differently to, say, the Emperor. But at the same period when the prequels the Jedi are failing in their connection with the Force, and then you have a Jedi that has that much ability. There's just so many different stories you could tell. So, yes, I'd love that. I mean, I
want to clarify. If he popped up in anything, I think I'd cry. But it's one of those things where if they did it right, people always talk about like powering him down. It's like, but would he still be him?
No, see, I'd power him up and then see what happens.
Just wrap it up to 1,000. Oh man. Well, cool. Well, that's anyone listening then who's anyone at Lucasfilm, double check and make sure Cavan's not spoiling anything. Any hint of Starkiller becoming canon, send it to Cavan. I'm sure you can.
As I say, I know nothing. There's one of those moments when I shouldn't even probably fan chat, but these are the things that go through my head. I have to wear the two hats of a fan and a pro in Star Wars now. And what I've done is I don't mention these things on Twitter anymore, as I used to go, oh, well, this will be fun. And then it would be Star Wars writer confirms. And you're like, no, I didn't confirm anything. Or it's obvious Star Wars writer knows nothing about Star Wars. That's just because I was riffing on wouldn't it be fun if this? So yeah, I don't do that kind of thing very much these days.
It's even harder for you because you're such a fan of you're like clamoring to do like old Republic Sith stuff, and in current Disney and Lucasfilm stuff, it's like, right, that doesn't exist yet. It's like everyone's clamoring for it, remaking the Knights of the Old Republic games. We're going to go down there eventually. Let's do the High Republic, then let's go older than that, I presume, is where they're going to go. But for you, it's like, I want to talk about these core ideas for Sith stuff. But if I do, we're going to get 18 articles saying Old Republic confirmed. It's like, no.
Oh God, the stories that I have, right, there are two sides of the scale. I have so many stories to the Sith Empire, so many about how that thing actually works. Because you just think that the people who should never have an empire are people that, are that, which is obviously what Darth Bane is all about. He's looking at you going, you idiots, let's just cut it down to two people and then it works. And then the flip side is I've got ideas sort of post episode 9, but obviously they're just fan theories in my head. As soon as I try and mention it in any kind of conversation, it will be like, oh, this is what they're doing. It's like, no, we're not. And no one's giving me the keys to that car. It's just that they're the two scale of where I would like to be working at, either ancient history for Star Wars, or pushing on beyond episode 9. And so it's funny sometimes when you see the articles. We confirm stuff left, right, and centre. We're always confirming stuff or addressing stuff. So I have a constant joke with Daniel that, because he's had a couple of articles. High Republic author addresses stuff, and he's like, I think his addressing was going, I don't know. So, you know, it was like, I've told him to stop, can you address the fact you're addressing things, please? And it's fun. It's part of it. You know, it's a privilege as well that people would, care that much about what you think about silly little things like that, that you've come up with in your head. But then you do have to be careful because people really believe it. And half the time people are talking about an article rather than the original comment or the original book. It's because someone's written an article. This is what they're saying. And you're like, no, we're not. But then that becomes there's 1,000 videos ranting about. And you go, there's nothing in the book that says that. But hey ho, good. There was something on Screen Rant. Brilliant.
That's the classic for Star Wars fans. It's just like, oh, there's something on Screen Rant. Well, you're probably going to have to ignore a lot of it.
Yeah, and that's why. And half that stuff is, it's cool fan. It's what you would see in fanzines in the old days. You would see someone saying, oh, this was in. I remember a great article in the fanzine, which was trying to prove that Guinan from Next Generation was a Time Lord, and it was amazing. And it was all from one line in a novel in one of the novels, and it was brilliant. And that's the kind of thing I loved seeing in fanzines. But now it appears on websites and is treated like news. And I was like, Lucasfilm are confirmed that they're doing this. Paramount has said that Guinan is a Time Lord. Like, no one said that. That person had a very cool idea, has written it as a article, which now people are taking as fact. And I think it's all become quite blurred between. It was obviously what a fanzine was back in the day and what an official source was. Those things are now completely different. And you have an entire generation of fans who've become pros. Mm-hmm. And so it's very difficult to navigate that as well, because half the time you want to do the fan thing and you want to watch something and then go online and say, oh, what about this? But you soon learn that you can't do that because it gets very messy very quickly.
You have to be very diplomatic with a lot of your responses. I've even heard you in other interviews talk about, certain opinions you have on the prequels or the sequels, which I'm not going to delve into here. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. I was a prequel generation baby, so I've got a soft spot for them more than most. But it's one of those things where you have to not be just like, episode 1 shit. I mean, I'm not saying you would say that, but you know what I mean? It's that sort of thing where if you're in...
Probably would at one point in my life, but I think I've grown to love it. So, but yeah, you can't... I think one of the things I do say online, and I try and maintain this, and some people probably don't like this. If I don't like something, I don't usually say it out loud online because it's that old thing. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything. And I will praise stuff I like, which probably some people think, oh, he's just shilling or whatever, and all those wonderful phrases that are thrown around willy-nilly online. But actually, it's because I know what it's like to put your heart and soul into a project, and then someone to come out and say, oh, it's rubbish because, and as I always say, it's everyone's complete right to say that. As someone who is a pro in this industry, another pro doesn't need me weighing in and say it. And, they don't need my words being thrown back at them. And I'm not saying that in a way that obviously everyone's just waiting to hear what Cavan Scott has to say on something. But there's a chance that if I slag something else off in Star Wars, it would come against them. It would even be something that I'm not involved with. There's so much of that happening these days. So I just keep stum and talk about it with my mates in the pub instead. So it's tempering what you're saying in what medium. I still moan as much as you can imagine I do about things I don't like, but I just don't do it very publicly.
That's a good way to do it. I do it the same with music. If I love an album, I'll tag the artist, be like, this is a great album. And if a new album comes out of an artist I like, I'm like, I'm just not going to mention it. I'm not going to tag them and say it sucks, because it's not fair. It's just not everything is for me. It's like you said at the start of this conversation. It's like, not everything is for everyone. But with keeping in line with perspective, I'm actually quite intrigued by... Obviously, in the High Republic itself, you are, to my knowledge, of the main 5, in air quotes, you're the only British individual of the High Republic. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, I thought I was. I was just making sure before I asked this question. It seemed like a fool. Do you think that, Star Wars in itself is an American project, but it has so much of its core is in English, in the sense of an English culture, and also a lot of the actors, especially in the original trilogy, were British, and obviously that's come to light in the other trilogies as well. So I didn't know if, in your opinion, or from what you've found, like, if you think because you're British, you bring anything different to the table. And the reason I asked that specifically is because in Shadow Service, one of the things I loved about it was the amount of references. Obviously, you can't reference pop culture in Star Wars. It doesn't really work.
Right.
But like the references in Shadow Service, some of the language, like I really liked that you were so free to be able to swear as much as you want. And obviously you can't in Star Wars, but even little things like when people say bollocks, like if I see anything, I won't spoil it, but there's a new Disney Plus show that's out at the moment, and there's a certain character in there who's British, and in that they say bollocks at one point, and it's like, oh my god, it's an American, So
if we were talking about the same show, it was one of the best British
openers.
Yeah, just sort of being British and not. There are other shows that you watch as a Brit, and you're just going, "Oh no, don't do that." But yeah, if I'm thinking we're talking about the same, there's lots of shows under the moon at the minute. But if we're talking about the same one, they nailed being British and just the British,
the dialogue
and everything,
and the bus and everything. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think what I probably my colleagues would say I bring Doctor Who to Star Wars because they have a little. They have a little moment when they wait for me to say, of course, this is like the Doctor Who story when. But I think that's what we've all brought to it. We've all brought our own culture to it. And so my culture is very much that 1970s, 1980s Doctor Who type worlds we used to live in, Blake Seven and things like that, which for me are so wrapped up in Star Wars because when you're a kid growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, you don't keep things between canon lines. You just mix everything up. I mean, it's how you play as a kid with toys. You spend half your time with Darth Vader fighting Optimus Prime, as you should. And so we've all done that. So yeah, I know I've brought in things that I think I talked a lot about my sort of Doctor Who and Star Wars fandoms because they are pretty much interlinked. I discovered them around the same time. And my fandoms, and I think actually the two fandoms have so many similarities. Both went through periods when there was wilderness years and the books and the comics were the only thing you had, and then they came back for a new generation and the books and the comics were sidelines into a different continuity. Doctor Who deals with it slightly differently because it's timey-wimey. Yeah, and anything can happen and any version of the Doctor can exist and history can be changed. And Star Wars obviously had a bit more, it had to be a bit more rigid in that. But I think that has affected my understanding of what canon is, because I come from that too, and comics as well. And comics can change every 5 seconds, and Superman can be, there could be a multiverse of Superman. But I think my understanding, one of the reasons this is why I do get some people shouting at me, why I did like the end of The Last Jedi to the moment I alluded to earlier on, is that Luke's behavior in front of Kylo Ren is the most Time Lord way of dealing with something, or the most doctory way. It's non-violent, it's tricking someone, it's using their own anger and their own strength against them, which at its heart is what the Doctor's been doing for nearly 60 years. So I think a lot of that, as coming from someone who wrote Doctor Who for a long time as well, I always have to remind myself that you can blow things up in some of the stories, or you can have people firing guns, because I've spent so much time trying to work with a character who blows stuff up. They blow stuff up regularly, but largely they don't fire a gun to solve the problem. And so I've had to retrain myself in certain franchises that's actually the way out of things sometimes. And try and find a different way of doing it, because I think that's why it's sometimes interesting when the Brit, sorry, I am going off on a tangent now, the Brit invasion of comics, with the Vertigo invasion, or all those kind of things, when you start to see people like Grant Morrison writing Superman, it became really interesting because they weren't from a cultural background when superheroes work. Our view of a superhero and what they should be is very different to an American's version of a superhero. You only have to look at Captain Britain and the original generation of Captain Britain, or the original iteration. Then when Alan Moore came in and rewrote that character, and then everyone who's done something else with Captain, you can tell when a Brit's writing Captain Britain, because there is a very British way of thinking that worked through him, because it's why we have Judge Dredd, and why Judge Dredd I don't think translates, because Judge Dredd is a parody. It's supposed to be a parody. It's not supposed to be taken 100% seriously as a character. He's there to tell a very different story, to explore a way of thinking. And And so that's why I think that it always seems to work when British people, well, most of the time works with British people writing superheroes, because we do come at it from a different angle. And so, hopefully that's what I bring into Star Wars as well. It's not saying that the other angles are wrong, but it's little, when we've been with the High Republic, when we talked about what does that thing about the Republic mean, all five of us had very different ideas of, whether that's the institution of a church and a state. It was interesting. We were coming out, we'd had Brexit while we were working on it. So my view of this big organization was perhaps very different to someone who'd been, living in the States for their entire life, because I could see the stresses in our real world and how that would play out in something like the High Republic. So yeah, I think we all bring those things, and hopefully it's that moment to come up with a different idea of how you would approach something, and just lots of mentions of Daleks.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where that's one of the beauties of the High Republic is, not only the multifaceted amount of content, both, you've got the audio drama like Tempest Runner, which obviously you're at the helm of, and then you've also got the books and the comics, and then, varying ages, which I've read as much as possible. I've read even the junior novels, which I always say are incredible, up to the YA and the air quotes adult novels and things, and even the all ages comics I think are ace. And I think that what the High Republic is quite cleverly is it's meant to be, the golden age of the Jedi, and it's meant to be all these different perspectives. One of my favorite elements of it was, I think, established in Light of the Jedi, which is every Jedi sees the Force in a different way. And that is one of my favorite ideas I've ever heard, because obviously in the movies you don't really get that. And I just think it's a very good symmetry, which works so well in its collaborative project, that there's primarily 5 of you at the helm figuring out where things go. I know more people are coming into it as we go through the phases, but the fact there's a collaborative effort in a realm of Star Wars where collaboration was, in theory, at its peak. And so I think that's a really, really good way of looking at things that actually works really well with the Star Wars work that you guys are doing at the moment as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And now, because we're opening it up, so we've got the new band of writers coming in. And I'm no longer the only Brit, George Mann. And so that's going to be interesting as we're bringing, and it is interesting as we're bringing in new voices, because obviously the first phase was largely just the 5 of us working together. And so now we've got new voices coming in with new ideas, and that's regenerating and re-energizing us. Because again, it's very easy to go down the same routes, and so we've got new ideas coming in now, and it's making us think, oh, hang on a minute, what about this? And so, as I've always said, we've got those points of where the story goes, that we've got the points on the map, but we've tried to leave enough space that we can take we can veer off a bit here, we can change the route, as long as we get to those fixed points in the story. It doesn't matter how we get there, as long as we get there and the story still works. And there have been along that way some changes. I think now it's been, people now know there is a character who dies in Claudia's last novel who originally wasn't going to die. And that's had ramifications for the entire story. But actually, the main points have still got to be adhered to for the story to work. But it's made us think, from that point on, it was like, well, what difference does that make to the characters? Knowing where they've still got hit, and how can we make it realistic, so it's not plot characters having to do stuff because the plot demands it. We know that we still have to get Ava and Elzar and Keeve and Skier and whoever to that point, but how they get there is going to be very different now, or it might be a little bit different or whatever. And so yeah, that's when the collaborative thing is really exciting, when you have those moments when someone will come up with an idea and you have to react. But in this case, we're all reacting, because you do it all the time in licensed fiction. It's usually because a film's happening, you have to change plot or something. But with this, we've had that moments when we've had to say, okay, but we know we've still got to get down there. And so the 5 of us then have had to work out, we think that's cool, but we know we've got to get there. So how do we move again? How do we push the tin around to make sure everything still works?
Yeah. And linking in with that as well, this is a question when I submitted to Disney Lucasfilm, this is the only one I thought they were gonna come back and say no to, even though it's a really minor thing. I'm just intrigued by, obviously you did Monster of Temple Peak, which I think is incredible. Ty Yorick was one of my favorite characters in The Rising Storm. And when I heard there's a series coming out, I was chomping at the bit for that. But what's interesting is that she's in the air quotes adult novel, and I know she appears in Race to Crash Point Tower very briefly, but she's mainly in The Rising Storm. And then obviously, IDW published Monster of Temple Peak, which is the 4-part miniseries with her air quotes origin story.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask is, obviously, and you've been doing the main run of the Marvel run of High Republic things. How was it different writing an all ages miniseries for IDW compared to how you were writing in The Rising Storm? I suspect part of it's because comic is slightly more collaborative and obviously there's the visual element, but I'm intrigued by the differences of Marvel comics to IDW comics, all ages to story in some ways.
Well, I didn't actually write that for IDW. IDW published it. So that was written for Disney. And so in different parts of the world, that's published in different ways. And so I was working with Disney Milan on that graphic novel as it originally was. And so it was designed as a chapter graphic novel, and then IDW published it as a miniseries in the US. And so, I mean, with all these things, you just have to treat the character slightly differently depending on the age group. So, I mean, actually, that story was always veering more towards a YA type story. Yeah, it was young, older middle grade kind of younger YA, I suppose. That's how it was sold to me of what, the area I had to hit with that one. But you just have to be true. It's like, again, to call back to superheroes, you can write a Batman story that's brave and the bold, or you can write a Batman story that's the Batman. That character works, and he's always Batman, but he can be for kids 1 minute in Super Pets, or he can be teaming up with Scooby-Doo, and the next he can be doing stuff in sort of for Black Label DC, which is incredibly adult and dark. Batman has to be the same throughout, and how he reacts to things and the extreme nature of his reactions you can see him. You can never see him being as violent as he is in the Batman as in an episode of Brave and the Bold. Mm-hmm. However, he still has to have the same limits of how far he'd go, and you still have to believe. And so with Ty, that's how I tried to tackle it, really. She still had to feel like Ty. It was a bit earlier on in the timeline as well, so she's not as well formed as she is in the novel from a personality point of view. Even I sort of wrote it similarly around the same time, but I think the novel was finished first, and then I was still writing the miniseries. But it still has to feel like that same character, and of course we do that in everything. So when I write Luke Skywalker in Star Wars Adventures, it still has to feel like the Luke I would write if I was writing an adult novel. So it's seeing things through a lens, and you have to remember who's watching it, and you have to be responsible. But the great thing about this initiative, where we have got all these different age groups, is that we can tell different kinds of stories, but still make them feel they're cohesive. And we know that some people will read them all, and some people won't go near something because it's a kid's book, and they'll, think they don't want to read that. But we've tried our hardest to make sure that it still felt like the High Republic. It's just there's a scale, a sliding scale, apparently, of how, of where it is on an age point of view, and how much, how graphic you can be. Let's face it, Star Wars, you don't ever get that graphic, because it still has within its boundaries its own. You can never be absolutely gory. I mean, there have been stories in the past that have done it, but it's not something that we're looking at doing now. I think I pushed things in Rising Storm to a point that, there was conversations. And again, in the comic, and I like the fact we have that ability, but you can't go too far. You can't go, because then you stop being Star Wars. And I think that's the biggest thing.
Very interesting. And sort of as we start to wrap up here, I could probably talk to you forever, because you just seem to like almost everything I like. So I have to keep this quite concise. But this is an open-ended question, and it is intended that way. And it's just, what is Star Wars to you? In however you interpret that question, whatever answer comes to your mind, just what is Star Wars to you?
It's such a hard question because my mind goes in so many different.
You can waffle as much as you'd like.
Different directions. I suppose, at its heart, it's that moment of still feeling like a kid and remembering what it's like to be excited. And I think there is something when you hear the music, especially, where you get sucked into your favorite scene from whatever your generation of movies or whatever it is, when it's letting yourself be a kid. And that doesn't mean you have to be an infant. You don't have to. You can still be a sophisticated adult, as far as I ever get to be a sophisticated adult. But it's that reminder to yourself that it's okay to lose yourself and to feel that excitement and to want to feel the same way as you did when you were 7 or whatever. And George Lucas always said it's for the 7 or 12-year-old in all of us. And I think that's very important. And again, the lens might be different, but it is heart, that adventure and that feel, and the heart. The heart in every Star Wars story has to be that sense of what it was like when you first saw that ship chasing the runner at the beginning of the film, or when you first saw Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting over a lava field, or whatever it is, when you first watched the Ewok cartoon, whatever it was that made you want to be a fan of that. I think that's what Star Wars is. It reminds you that you're allowed to still have that in your life.
That's a brilliant answer. And I'll say, if anyone is unfamiliar with what Cavan in his own sort of origin story was of Star Wars, I've got my comic here, which just evidences. There you go. Got Jackson there and some hoojibs. Yeah. So that's the little being that started Cavan off on his amazing journey of going from the weird and the wonderful all the way to what you're doing now, which is still weird and wonderful in all the best ways, but now with a much wider scope of things, which I absolutely adore. So, I want to just say, thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you want to just tell people, it's been a delight. In all honesty, I could chat to you for ages, but you're a busy guy. And I've got a life as well. So I tag that on at the end. But I'll put in the description, I'll put obviously link to your website, and I really encourage everyone to subscribe to your newsletter because it's excellent. You've got, with your vast history, you've got Doctor Who audio dramas, you've obviously got your stuff with Star Wars, going back to Star Wars Adventures, as well as the stuff of the High Republic as well. You've got, and Dooku Jedi Lost as well. You love audio dramas. and you've got The Ward and Shadow Service and Phantom of the Opera and Pacific Rim and Titans. Like, I could probably always do on a whole hour-long podcast just reeling different IPs and things which you've been involved with. But from your own mouth, what are the sort of final things that you want to tell the audience before we wrap this up? Go. Basically, if you want to know what I do, just have my to-do list is the same when I was 10, and I want it to be like that forever, no matter what I'm writing. And pretty much that's what my website is. It's me just going, this is what I've always loved, and this is where I am. So yeah, come along to my website, cavanscott.com, see what I'm doing. Find me on Twitter, I am far too much, and just talk to me about stuff, because that's the bit I love. That's the bit I've missed at conventions, over the last couple of years. And I'm so excited that we've got conventions back in different forms. Because at the end of the day, whether it's new material or whether it's working for a franchise, I love fandom and I love being a fan and I love what that means to people. So, come and chat to me, and I will always chat far too long about far too many obscure things. But yeah, that's who I am. And I will second that, because one of the things I loved most about you when I started following you on Twitter is, now, for any listeners, don't suddenly rush Cavan Scott's Twitter, but he does actually respond quite a decent amount of the time. For someone who's as busy as you are, you do manage to actually respond to fans quite a lot, even if it's just a thank you or a like or a retweet or whatever. And so as someone who, I can't remember how long ago it was, a year plus ago, but I commented something to you at some point, you're saying you're awesome or whatever, and you responded, and I was like, oh, that's, you're so busy, you don't expect a response from someone who's so busy. So I want to say thank you for the positivity that you spread on social media as well, because I think, especially in the Star Wars fandom, although for the most part, I think Star Wars fandom is amazing and huge amounts of benefit to it, there are those darker corners. But I think people such as yourself really help shine a light, you know, nose to the for life thing in the High Republic, but you really do shine a light on the more positives of
thank
the
you.
Star Wars.
And, you know, and that's exactly what I want it to be. You know, I have no interest in flame wars. I have no interest in people coming and I say this regularly, you know, come in and have a pop at me by all means. Just don't expect a response, because life's too short for all of us, both sides of that conversation. Talk to me about what I love. You know, you can come in being you can hate the High Republic as much as you want, but if you want to talk to me about a really obscure issue of the Marvel run from 1978 and 9, absolutely, I'll respond. And I'm far more interested in what you like than what you hate. I mean, that's not to dismiss the fact that you know, if someone doesn't like something I've written, and, you know, and you have to be tough-skinned to be this job. Some days you're more tough-skinned than others, and you have to know how to take criticism. However, at the same point, I'd much rather talk about... there's so many people that come and every now and then drop flaming garbage trucks at my posts and things. I'm like, I'd love to know what you like about Star Wars. Just tell me what you like. You know, I know very well what you don't like. That is obvious. But I can guarantee we have more in common than you think we do. Because every fan of something does. And I don't think you even have to have something in common of you know, I have no, you know, there are certain fandoms I know nothing about. I'm not a Stargate fan. I've watched about 2 episodes of the show. It's not that I don't like it. It's just there is only so many hours of the day. I bet you I've got loads in common with a Stargate fan, because we know what it's like to be a fan of something. And I think that's what we've missed on social media so much recently, when it's become everything in life's become polarized, and you've forgotten that, you know, you can talk to people who don't believe the same thing as yours, and it doesn't have to be a row. You know, it's you can actually get something out of the conversation if you want to put it in. And that's the thing. Usually in those conversations, I do want to put the time in, because I believe in being a fan, and I believe in the importance of fans talking to each other, because that's why we do this. That's why we get involved beyond watching a film or reading a book, going out and meeting other people who also love those things. That's why we go to conventions. That's why we go online. That's why we read fanzines. That's why we join join forums. And I love that stuff. But yeah, the other stuff, that's fine. You can have your row over there, but I'm not going to get involved in that.
That's perfect. You are a true gentleman, sir, and I appreciate you greatly. And also, I will say before I press for stop recording, is that I noticed in another conversation you mentioned something about imposter syndrome. We all get it in some ways, and I'm British as well, so I get it sometimes as well, just doing this and speaking to people like yourself. But I know it may not mean a lot from me, but I can promise you, from all the stuff I've read and all the content I've consumed, you are in no way an imposter. You are a imposter. Is that? I don't know. You should be where you are.
That should be the way it works, isn't it? If you're an imposter, the opposite's a poster. There's loads of stuff like that. Yeah, but thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem at all. Well, this is where we'll stop recording. So just thank you again.